Sandra Battaglini is an actor, stand-up comedian, and writer. She's also the founder of the Canadian Association of Stand-Up Comedians, an organization that represents comics in Canada and lobbies for them to be recognized as the brilliant, culturally significant artists that they are. I just wrote an article for The Breach that features Sandra, among other comedians, and looks at some of her efforts to push for fair pay, government recognition from the Canada Council, and organized resistance against the pull of American media imperialism. Her left political perspectives are in many ways written in CASC's DNA. She talks here about how CASC was imagined as a kind of rights movement focused on stressing the right to be included among other communicative arts that we consider culturally more ennobling or important. She insists that we really take a hard look at the system and objectively assess the extent to which it's tilted in favor of already economically massive players. She wants us to ask the material question: how many opportunities are there? And to what extent are performers being sold certain fictions that make them more vulnerable to being exploited? For example, she says that performing just for exposure is basically a big lie. As she puts it, what are you exposing yourself to, if not a market in which there are no standards? Efforts like the ones that CASC organizes, like the hashtag #PayComedians viral campaign, work to establish standards of equitable pay and recognition of structural inequality. These campaigns are showing what is possible, giving comics a bigger piece of the revenue they create, exposing the power of a few players that, Sandra points out, feel like they can corral and control comedians, and reckoning with the fear that individual comedians may have, which tends to work against solidarity and take away their power to resist monopolistic control. The main theme here is probably autonomy. Sandra has this sense that building, quote, our own stuff here means that you're generating the spirit to move forward. I appreciated all of the detail she gave on the struggle to gain official recognition and government funding. Ultimately, she says that she's not interested in having a theoretical argument about whether comedy is art. The question for her is, shouldn't it be supported? For me, the answer to that question is definitely yes, because I agree with Battaglini that comedy is more everyday, more accessible as an art form than most. This is such a central part of its power. Humor makes people more open to having difficult conversations. It's non-elitist, in Sandra's words, and so it often allows for a more lively form of connection to occur. I love the point she made here about how comedy is also way more immediate than many art forms. It's happening every night, and expresses in real time what it means to live in a particular place. That immediacy is a huge part of its appeal, its relevance, and a reason it should be better supported by the public. So yeah, I mean, the first question I wanted to ask you is sort of a broad one in a way. It's about sort of your almost philosophical, maybe even like, I don't know, political, spiritual relationship to comedy. Like in your open letter from, I think, 2016, Just a Little Reciprocity, you write that telling jokes is integral to life, which is like a big swing in some sense when it comes to comedy. But like, this is what you're in some ways about, is taking these big swings at claiming a place for comedy as a form of art and all that stuff. You talk in that piece about how comedy is this immediate thing. It's devoted to kind of releasing us from tension. So I'm really interested in that.
Mm-hmm.
What is your specific kind of take on the place of comedy in sort of everyday life, I guess?
I mean, if you just see the way that people interact, like all your relationships with, you know, your best ones are the ones that, like, you can really laugh with those people. That's like,
Mm-hmm.
a sign of, being comfortable, not taking yourself so seriously. You know,
Mm-hmm.
I think that, like, especially when you think of your family, like I think, in my family, the you know craziest times we've had is like when we really laugh, like, at each other, and
Mm-hmm.
I just think that it's something that we've been doing forever. And now we call it comedy. Now we call it, like, there's an industry around it, but those are all false. Those are all just like manifestations of ego, or like identity, to say, oh, this is comedy, this is something else. It's like, no, it's life. You can always see, like, with comedy, it's like there's always that crescendo where it goes so, it's so tense, and like, the joke is like, a short circuit in the brain. I was taught this concept, by Karen Hines. Like, I'm also a clown, so I studied, pachinko clown and Buffon, and Karen Hines is, a legendary clown. And so when you look at Buffon, which is the antithesis of clown, the clown is the mirror to the world. The Buffon is the shows the world their hypocrisy. Is that it is comedy is that short circuit in the brain because you don't expect it. You're like, where are we going? And then when you go, then the brain's like, ah! It just explodes because it can't even believe that it went there.
Mm-hmm.
I think, I mean, it could also go the opposite way, because if that explosion is like, maybe, what the audience might not want to hear, or that it hurts, it's still explosive, and it'll still have a reaction.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, the best one is when everyone just explodes into laughter. Um,
Yeah.
and I mean, it releases all sorts of endorphins, as we know. I guess it was just like at the time that I wrote the letter, which took me, months and months and months to write. It became it was looking at comedy in a philosophical way, because it was trying to justify why comedy isn't, you know, uh, funded, for example. And I mean, early on, when I had written that letter, and when we formed CASC, people be like, well, I don't know if I don't know if comedy's an art form. It really isn't. And it's like, I don't care what people think, whether it's funded, whether they think it's art or not. It's like, should it be supported, just like every other industry is supported? And also, I've had many conversations with the Canada Arts Council, and at one point they were like, well, it was in an article I wrote as well, but that they saw comedy as entertainment, much like
Mm-hmm.
sports and strippers. And I was like,
Wow.
and then I said to him, like, I've seen many things that are funded by the Canada Arts Council, and it ain't art. And I mean, obviously, comedy, stand up, all of it. Sometimes it's art, and sometimes, like Kenny Robinson once said, you're just babysitting drunks. So you're
Right.
responding. You're responding to the immediate situation, which is like what clown is. Clown is like, from what I was taught, was that you can have a whole set plan. You can come out and you have your whatever it is that you're going to do. You're going to, I don't know, eat a banana or whatever it is that you're going to do, but you have to be willing to give that all up when you hit the stage, because you have to deal with what's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really, to me, I don't think clown is separate from comedy at all. It is comedy. It's like, you need to respond. You are responding to what's going on, and that's where sometimes the most brilliant moments come from, because it is that interaction with the crowd. And obviously, there would be no comedy if there were no audience. You can't
Mm-hmm.
tell jokes to yourself. I mean, you could. That's how you write them. But it's really that interaction.
Yeah. Be pretty narcissistic to just tell jokes to yourself. Help you
Yeah.
maybe get through the day to do like bits.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There are
Um,
people who do that, but yeah, exactly.
yeah, but
Yeah.
the art of it is the this is why, just a little reciprocity is such an interesting and thoughtful title for that letter, because it is this reciprocal relationship. And like, I've heard you
Mm.
talk elsewhere about the sort of transformative experience of taking the Pachinski, or sorry,
Pachinko.
pachinko clown kind of training seminar, like it was like 5 or 6 weeks or something,
Yeah.
and how like it really kind of freed you up to write and create, like that idea of kind of following your impulses, like
Hmm.
making room for your impulses and all that stuff. Like, I think that's really interesting, especially when you like, and there's so much in what you just said that I want to talk about and come back to. But for a second, I guess I want to ask you about like this idea of false frames and like ego and identity, and how clown kind of maybe moves you away from that to some extent. Because it seems like, especially in this like gig economy where everybody's supposed to be an entrepreneur and hustle, in comedy especially, maybe more so than in other arts, what you're commodifying is really your voice, your unique persona. Do you think that in some ways that is like, it goes against this idea of like making room for your impulses, trying to grow as a comedian? Like, is there too much pressure basically on the cultivation of that like individual commodifiable like identity when it comes to becoming a comedian right now, especially?
Yeah. I the we had created. I'm not sure if you're aware, but CAS created CanCom, which is the Foundation for Canadian Comedy. And it's a foundation devoted to raising money to disperse to comedians. It was modeled after the Factor grant, so the music grant, because there is, early on when we were advocating, I always believed, I'm like, look, at some point the Canada Council will, either acknowledge or allow more comedy to be funded. But aside from that, we need something that's just devoted to comedy, because as you're aware, the story of music is very similar and was very inspiring to our trajectory. So anyhow, at one point, maybe I think it was 2 years ago, we had completed an economic, like a survey, because every time we'd go to the government and ask them, when can we get funded? They're like, listen, we know that comedy is such a force in this country, but we need to know the economic impact. We need to know what it means to the economy. And this is the way that, for example, the Department of Finance and the Canada Council for the Arts can be justified in saying, well, we're going to devote this amount of money to comedy because this is how it impacts the economy. So anyways, there was an organization that got funding, ironically, a grant to study the economic impact of comedy in Ontario. And when I was being interviewed, the woman asked me, she's like, well, aren't you excited, like with social media and like how that can really impact, comedians' ability to, be discovered or to make money? And I was like, no, I'm not excited. I mean, I see how it's impacted a lot of comics and what it's doing. It's cool in some way, but it still just looks at numbers and a formula. It's not considering the art of it. So, those tools are helpful, just like a phone is helpful, but it's too much based on like how many likes and how many followers. And I mean,
Totally.
And I really believe that all these things are just, it depends how you want to live your life, but a lot of these things just won't even make any sense as we move forward in our consciousness, because like, I mean, how much can we keep like commodifying? How much can we keep selling and counting and consuming? It's over. Like, it's done. You know what I mean?
What you mean, yeah.
So,
and I respect that perspective. Like I've heard you, articulate it elsewhere, just like your awareness of the tipping point we're at and the level of crisis. And I want to, maybe get to just like a question of how your own politics, your own like education, all that stuff has really fed into your commitment to the Canadian Association of Stand-Up Comedians, your vision in some ways. But you talked about CanCom. It sounds like that's currently, like, since you stepped down from CASC as president, that seems like it's like your main project maybe now. I was kind of
well, no, I'm not involved. Like, I was on the board for a while, but like, yeah, no, I'm not involved with CanCom at the moment. But like, yeah, when I took a break from all of it. It was like I devoted 5 years to all of this, and it was impacting my health. I bet, like, it was just like, that's why a prime minister or someone only has a 4-year term, because you can't do this kind of stuff that long. And also,
especially it's like volunteer based, a lot of it,
yeah,
right? Like it's
all
not
of it.
Yeah.
So it's like the prime minister gets paid, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Or those people get paid to do their job, but and even people who devote their lives to like at certain advocacy and certain organizations, they are getting paid, even though it's very taxing, they're getting paid. But this was like, and I don't regret, honestly, a moment of it. And the one part of the advocacy that I've, kept going, although it's very sporadic, because we were going to be going to Europe with the Department of Heritage for the Creative Industries Trade Mission. So one of my big things that I, was really promoting and advocating for was just like, let's forget about the United States. Like, if you want to go there and do your thing, of course, like it's obviously a great market, but like, why don't we focus on getting comedians out of the country and, and telling the story that Canada has this great legacy. And every
Mm-hmm.
time I would pitch this to the Department of Heritage, and anybody at the government, they were just like, oh, because I was like, what greater way to export Canadian culture and identity, and what cheaper way than through stand-up comedy? And they were all they were all very interested by this notion. So that's the one thing, like, what I don't know when that mission is going to happen because it got canceled so many times for obvious reasons. But
Mm-hmm.
yeah, anyways, that's the one
Yeah.
part of the advocacy and also we're trying to get some um, some stuff happening with the city of Toronto. That although we had some initial meetings with them, but yeah, that's kind of it right now. I mean, that's not that I wouldn't get back to it. It's just like it was such a big thing that I was like, I got to take it easy.
Yeah, and I mean, like, you're doing it at a time where there's this unprecedented pandemic, and there's like a greater sense of urgency
Oh,
than at other times to keep, especially performers, the artistic community in general was hit really hard by the pandemic. And I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, like, you mentioned social media and how you're just not sold on the opportunities that it produces. I mean, there's all kinds of added labor with added unpaid labor with
oh,
social
jeez.
media, and yet it's this mandatory thing. Like, to maintain your public profile, you have to do it. For some people, I think it's pleasurable. Like, they just come to it naturally. You look at somebody like Steph Tolev, who
Yeah.
has made it pretty big in the States.
Hmm.
She's very good at managing her social media accounts. It's clearly not really an onerous thing for her, but even she complains on her podcast and elsewhere about like how she has to do that all on her own. There's really no team around you.
Yeah, I think she's just she's a beast, so she does
Yeah.
it. I'm sure she's just like, fuck, I wish somebody else could do this for me, but she's
Hmm.
so focused and
Yeah.
does it, and it's amazing. Like, honestly, like, I just started uh posting like clips of my sets online because everybody would always say, like,
Hmm.
post on Instagram because you improvise a lot, and it's not like I don't want to create content for the internet. That's ridiculous. But
Hmm.
like, what I find most pleasurable, and because I haven't figured out though really what I could put on Instagram. I just
Hmm.
haven't. It just hasn't come to me, or that I've been inspired, like, moved to do it in yet. But the things that I really that bring me a lot of joy and just, I guess, a lot of peace too is like writing, because I like to write concepts for TV, and they
Hmm.
just come to me, and then that's what I spend my time writing and reading and writing scripts. And so I really really like that. And yeah, but like, there's a certain way, like, there, you look at Nima Nazari, like, he's killing it, because like, and he's just so talented. Like, it's amazing what he's doing online. And it's funny as hell, but it's like he's
Hmm.
got a machine going now,
Yeah.
and it's great. And but again, you just look at, again, it's consuming this content. You're just scrolling between, a character. You get advertised for, a cream for saggy skin, and 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 conspiracies, and politics, and all this shit. It's like, I sometimes look at Instagram, and it's like, I can't look at it because it actually hurts me. It bothers me. It
Hmm.
doesn't feel good.
Well, I mean, yeah, I mean, we've now reached a point where it's been revealed by the Francis Hogan leaks and all of these studies that it's generally bad for people's like self-esteem on some level. I think like that's the funny thing about like counting followers is that we imagine social media as this meritocracy when really it's
No.
governed by these massive companies, and there's this unclear algorithm that really drives it. And so you experience not achieving a following as like a personal failure when really it's a structural problem. And you're also like really insightful, I think. I've noticed you really hit the nail on the head in terms of like identifying the problem with the structure and not like individuals. Like, over and over again you say like um and Monty Scott is good on this too. He talks about like how comedians are sort of a lone wolf vagabond type and tend to not get together. But you talk about how like that if there's toxicity, it's really largely bred by what Janelle Niles called like a cutthroat culture where there aren't that many opportunities. It's not like
Exactly.
individuals, right?
And I mean, it's like this might sound ridiculous, but a lot of what inspired me too when I started this was just like looking at, it's a rights movement. So like looking at civil rights movements, in certain countries, especially the United States, like you see how, for example, here's a group of people that kept getting told they were no good, they were inferior, they were lower than, and they were like, okay, I don't think so, and they didn't, and they persisted and persisted and persisted and had to claim their own value. And that's Canadian comedians. I mean, I couldn't. I'm not comparing the experience,
Yeah, it's not a one-to-one thing. Yeah.
but it is a rights movement because it's the right to be included. It's to be acknowledged, and and when you look at, yeah, it's like, I was talking with a friend about all this, and he sort of sees, he's like, come on, you can't keep saying that it's because it's Canada that you can't you know uh, get ahead or whatever. I go, but you look at the system, and if the networks are mostly buying American content and not creating content, which is what their mandates are, then how many opportunities are there to, move beyond, well, I'm a comic, I'm touring the country. If nobody's seeing you on TV, then what are they watching? They're watching American content. They're watching American comics.
Mm-hmm.
And like, yeah, and a lot of people will go back and it's like, okay, once you build your online, like, how Letterkenny did, and
Mm-hmm.
comics like Nima, because Nima is here. Steph went to the States, so she's doing her thing, and it's amazing. But she did go to the US, so that's, she's in a different market. But when you look at, these success stories in Canada, Letterkenny was like, well, let's just create our own stuff. And that's really, like, that's what I see. It's like, we just got to create our own stuff and
Yeah.
and be open to the universe to receive them. And I know that sounds crazy, but but at the same time, that's kind of like the spirit that you need to have to move forward, because like otherwise, like, what are we doing in this country? I mean, it's
Sure.
it's really kind of grotesque.
Yeah, and I mean it's so the case that there aren't the resources there. Like all of my research has been kind of pointing to that. That like for example, CBC Gem might be the most sort of diverse and interesting platform, but it represents a tiny fraction of CBC's even like total budget, which isn't that much, right? It really can't compete with the Netflix and Crave and Show Me. Like these things are not going to compete with
No.
major streamers. And so, yeah, I mean, if the structure existed, then you would have this greater, a greater capacity to produce content, and there would just be this kind of, I think, snowball effect. But what you're talking about in terms of the comparison with the civil rights movement, honestly, to me, is interesting because really that's about like being recognized for your humanity, basically, in that case. But here you're talking about being recognized for your artistry and your hustle and like how that
Yes.
validation and recognition can lead to a bigger sort of flourishing. And I think like that has something to do with the changing demographics of the audiences for comedy. Like one of the things you say in your open letter to Trudeau, which he never responded to, is that there's never been more comedy being performed than right now. There's this
Yeah.
huge demand for it. And I think like in Canada and elsewhere there's this maybe new sense that comedy is a medium for like political communication too, that
Absolutely.
especially like that there's a way that and it's not the case everywhere and there's all kinds of different comedy, but do you get the sense now that like there's a greater hunger among audiences for experiences of like, because like a lot of audiences don't necessarily have the opportunity to like and there's no real public sphere anymore, right? Like
Mhm.
academic political spaces have sort of themselves eroded, and it feels to me like that scene of going to a comedy show and laughing and even talking back, there's that reciprocity in the context of a show,
Mhm.
um, that it gives you an opportunity maybe to think critically about things like inequality, injustice, social norms, all that stuff.
Yeah.
um, is it that comedy is a little less preachy than those sort of more stuffy spaces of academia and politics?
Yeah, and there's like, yeah, and it's definitely, I mean, the fact that there's alcohol, you
Right.
know, I mean, it loosens you up. It's nighttime. But yeah, definitely. I think that those kinds of institutions are elitist,
Yeah.
whereas comedy is not. Comedy is like, it's for the people. It's like it's speaking the vernacular, It's like when
Right.
Dante wrote the Divine Comedy in the vernacular and didn't use the Latin. It was a revolution, because all of a sudden now he's using the Florentine dialect to diss everybody, putting popes in hell, putting all the people that are, criminals, and in their place. And they banished him, so it's
Right.
like you take the language of the people and you speak the language, then all of a sudden there's a connection. It's just like, yeah, it's like the same when, my parents are from a certain part of Italy. It's like when you speak the dialect, it's funnier. Like there's so much more
For sure.
ridiculousness in the vernacular conversation that happens with people, And somehow, like people sometimes think, well, it's stand-up comedy, you know, maybe it's not as smart as the other arts. But I think that's the that's the genius of it, because it doesn't appear that way sometimes right away, because it's so accessible to people. Like, somebody who's going to go to a comedy club, they might go to the theater for sure, but you know, they might not,
Hmm.
so it's like it brings theater to a different kind of person that wouldn't go, like, have a subscription to whatever, Soul Pepper, or any of these organizations,
Hmm.
and that stuff's beautiful too. Don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that theater, like, I love theater, but even when you look at, the irony, for example, that Canada funds works from playwrights that are not even Canadian, like Shakespeare. I mean, there's more money given to Shakespeare, and the guy's dead, than there are to Canadian voices,
Right.
that actually speak about the lived experience of being Canadian. As it happens, as comedy is happening every night, multiple times all over the country, it's about those people, those Canadians who are living their lives in their communities,
Yeah.
and that's why it's so powerful.
Well, there's a book, I think it's called Shakespeare in America, that's like a
Mm,
historical account of how
mm,
Shakespeare was like vulgar, right? Like plays that were, Shakespearean plays that would tour, they were for the people during,
yeah.
like 16th, 17th century. Like, and this idea that today we have like still this binary between high and low art, that comedy is like, a lot of people will reject it outright as like this vulgar art, and it's, I think, this kind of spontaneous hostility to just the swearing in it, or the raunch of it, or whatever. But I think you're right to suggest that there's a way in which, like, comedy, because it operates in that mode, can kind of Trojan horse politics in some ways. And I guess I wondered, like, on that note, you've performed in a lot of different places in Canada, and I wonder, like, what are your favorite cities to perform in? You talked about the fact that you learn from clown how to kind of modulate what you're doing for the audience. Like, when have you had to do that in Canadian cities? Which ones tend to be maybe the more progressive or inclusive? Which tend to be the more conservative ones? And to what extent do you have to key your comedy to the culture of a place?
Most of my performing experience has been Ontario, obviously, but
Hmm.
and I'm originally from Sudbury, so obviously I love to perform in Sudbury.
Hmm.
Guelph is like, much more like a socially minded, politically minded place. So,
Right.
and even just in the city too, sometimes in Toronto, it's like you can go to certain venues and know that, well, you know what, I can't, I have to be careful because this is a maybe more woke, quote unquote, crowd.
Hmm.
I love Hamilton. I love performing in Hamilton.
It's my hometown.
Oh, really? Yeah, like,
Yeah,
Hamilton. It's like working class. That's where I come
very
from too.
much
So it's
so.
like,
Yeah.
those places like that. I mean, Ottawa. I love going to Ottawa. I don't know what it is, but and also because there's such a rich, um, you know, scene there. And I think that
Hmm.
also influences too the comfort of performing, because when there is a really rich scene, then audiences are much more, um, they're trained in comedy. I
Hmm.
love the East Coast. I love St. John's, Halifax. I feel like I haven't been there in quite some time, but like I felt like I could just be who I was out there also, and it was cool.
Mm-hmm.
And where else? I'm trying to think. And Niagara Falls, love Niagara Falls. Oh
Oh,
my god.
sure, right.
Yeah, yeah, of course.
The kind of excitement and the tourism and all that
Yeah,
stuff. A weird cross section of people, probably.
yeah, yeah. It's
Um,
so interesting.
yeah. Well, I mean, I got to ask you about the work you've done with CASC.
Yeah,
I do want to also, I want to, I guess, start by asking about these two main objectives that CASC has, according to, the website, the mission statement. Number one is what you call the cycle of advancement, production, promotion, presentation, broadcast, and distribution of comedy content. And maybe this speaks to what CanCom is currently doing to support the creation of Canadian intellectual property for promotion. But then the other one is to promote a harassment free environment, racial, social, economic, physical, mental, and gender justice and equality. People have written about like there's an article in I think the Walrus recently about how like there's been this push since 2020, especially in the death of George Floyd, for like more diverse performers and stories. But like this article that Soraya Roberts writes in the Walrus talks about how like that has mostly been a fairly superficial push by major corporations to kind of get their PR in order around seeming like they welcome diversity. But at the same time, there is this like opening right now. And I wonder to what extent CASC is sort of looking at this opening and realizing that like its membership is really diverse and there is like this potential for more diverse leadership, for a greater texture of experience to basically be represented in this supposedly multicultural and certainly very diverse country of Canada. Like, to what extent does comedy still need to diversify, and is that like a major part of like the sense of responsibility CASC has to its members? I guess.
I mean, I think that I want to read that article. Just look at you look at the recent JFL lineup for Toronto, and I mean, it's all white women, and the men are all diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Like, they're not white. So
Mm-hmm.
it's just such a, I don't know. It's like yeah. Definitely on the corporate side, there is this false. It's false. The way that they sort of push this notion around.
Yeah, it would produce a more interesting set of stories. We've heard from the white guys already. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like
yeah, yeah.
we've heard that story in some ways. So I think like there is a transformation happening. It's just a question of to what extent the structure is going to accommodate it, and that's what CASC clearly has been largely about. Is like trying to push the structure itself to accommodate what is already there.
Yeah.
And struggling.
Yeah.
Like especially after COVID. You talk in an Exclaim article about how stand-up comedians in Canada are seriously underrepresented. They face what you call a circle of entrapment.
Yeah.
This idea that not only are the opportunities limited, but the Canadian kind of comedy scene is full of like gatekeepers, more or less, where like you headline a club, you perform at Just for Laughs, and then you say you've hit a ceiling.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I mean, like this idea that there's also a monopoly within like Yuck Yucks, for example. You talk in, I think in one of your posts about how some comics even use pseudonyms so as not to get in trouble with bigger clubs.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask about like, what is going on there? First of all, like, how does that represent the sort of creativity and hustle of Canadian comedians, but also like the unfairness of the system?
Yeah. It's like, I think it's just like there's a couple of players and they feel that they can have ownership over individual comedians, and it's and so they're successful at it because they can say, well, you can't perform over here, and because comics are afraid and there's limited opportunities, they're like, okay, yeah, I'll do what you say, but they want to play the other spots, so then they make up a name, and those are the names that appear on the boards. Like, I don't see it happening as much lately. Because
Yeah.
here anyways, but I know it's still, it still happens a lot. And I always tell comics, I'm like, don't listen to what they tell you. Like, perform where you want to perform. It's crazy. They're not paying you a living wage. Like, what do you? What?
Yeah.
Why do they think they can tell you where to go?
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yeah, I mean, and I like that in that same piece you talk about how like your name means something to you. You're not going to change your name.
Yeah,
That's like it's a part of obviously a part of who you are. The idea of having to like sell that off in order to just keep working, and so like that to me is why CASC is so important. Obviously, like I want to ask about the Pay Comedians hashtag campaign, and the this tendency or like just a reality of having to perform just for exposure. Like that seems still to be a baseline just sort of assumption within the comedy scene. And I mean in academia to some extent that's the case too, but obviously there's like this baked in elitism to some extent and a recognition that's there. But like to what extent was that Pay Comedians campaign that CASC spearheaded about trying to just like respect the dignity of people's labor, you know?
yeah. It was like I don't remember who came up with the hashtag, but we were just like, there's a point when you see all these shows being produced, and let's say the comedy bar, there's 100 seats, and you hear this all the time, where it's like box office could be like $1,500, $2,000, and the comic's getting paid $20.
Which
And
is insane. Yeah.
yeah, and so it's just like, and I had a lot of people say to me, they're like, since this hashtag and since this movement to pay comics, at least talk about it, a lot more places, and I noticed that a lot more places do pay, and so
Mm-hmm.
it's like when you see too, like certain places, like even like Yuck Yucks, it's like they're taking 40 and 50 and even more percent of a commission on road gigs. You just can't
Mm-hmm.
justify you can't justify it. And how do we find it acceptable?
Mm.
How do we continue to find it acceptable? And I like even this idea, yeah, of exposure. It's like, I mean, I was in that mindset too, but it's a big lie, because what are you being exposed to? What are you exposing yourself to?
Exploitation.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, there comes a point, and I get it when you're new, that you're like, yeah, I want stage time. I want to go out. I want to do stuff,
Sure.
for sure.
It's
Um,
fun, right?
but at the same time, it's like it's false,
Mm.
because it's like if someone's making money at the door, then they should distribute some of that money.
Mm-hmm.
And you see the producers who are good at it and ones who aren't, and like there's conscientious people and non-conscientious people. Um, but I think it's because, yeah, there is no standard. There's no standards. And that's what we were trying to do with the Pay Comedians guideline. It's like a guideline they just released, like around, we're not telling you how to pay people, because there's all sorts of scenarios, and
Mm-hmm.
but here's like maybe a baseline that you could follow. Like if there's these amount of seats, and then this is the ticket price, this is what you can expect, or what you should expect, or to ask for. And I think that's a lot of a problem too. It's like, people come at you and they're like, hey, we got this event, what do you charge? Well, I don't know, what's your budget? Could be, what if you have
Yeah.
a $50,000 budget and I'm charging you $500? I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And I mean, I learned these things along the way, like even through my own agents. But yeah, it's
Mm-hmm.
but it's great to see though that more and more people are getting paid, and there's that acknowledgement of it.
And it's about knowledge. Like I think that's again like CASC is educating people in some ways, right?
Yeah.
That through its own fundraising, through these campaigns, just trying to say like what would happen if comedians were actually supported? Like what would that actually
Oh my god,
produce in terms of the art? Just like facilitating that.
the best
Um,
comedy ever.
yeah, why
That's.
not?
I mean, I believe it. I believe that's where it's going to go.
Hmm. Well, and you talk in these two letters, right? So it starts with this open letter in 2016, but then you kind of come back to it. And I really wanted to ask about this Article 605 piece, sort of a follow up to the Just a Little Reciprocity letter, um, and how it builds on the claims of that first letter, and really in some ways is like a much more radical piece of writing. But like the continuum is just that like you want autonomy for Canadian content producers. The American market, because of its scale, is kind of cannibalizing Canadian comedy. But you also, like one of the things you point out is that this Canada Arts Presentation Fund, which funds festivals like Just for Laughs, um, it's like remarkable that this is maybe it is like the biggest I think comedy festival in the world, and yet comedy itself is not recognized sort of as a legitimate art by, Canada Council for the Arts. I wanted you to kind of elaborate on that a little bit, the ways in which, it connects to CASC pushing for labor mobility, a recognition of the bigger picture. So changing the terms is important, but also changing the sort of conditions of people's like employment clearly is part of the story. Do you think people are starting to get the picture, basically? It sounds like you're pretty hopeful in some ways, right?
Yeah, I think people are starting to get the picture, but it's not sort of translated into anything concrete per se. It's like I think we're seeing like a lot of changes, but like they're subtle, but nothing concrete yet. I mean, you just look at the recent Just for Laughs lineup, and it's like it's all Americans. There's like 12 Canadian comedians on the galas, and you're like, what is happening? And it just was disheartening when I saw that. I was just like, also because like I don't really pay attention too much to them, but a lot of comics are coming to me and being like, oh my God, I didn't get this. And like, because when the lineups are announced, Just for Laughs does this big show of like all these showcases, but then they fucking, they choose like a handful of comics and they're all hosted mostly by American comics, like the galas and the bigger shows. And you don't see them being promoted at all, So it's like, why are we funding a festival that's borrowing from American celebrity? It's lazy. That's a Canadian system. It's a lazy system.
Yeah, it is like the easy way to go, right? Is to have Maria Bamford, Kurt Braunohler, these kind of these people who have these big high profile comedy specials come in and like draw the crowds or whatever, because of that established media system in the States, right?
Yeah.
And you're limiting opportunities for people in Canada who are, really talented. Like Monty Scott is very funny, right? Like
it's brilliant.
Al Val is very funny. I know Val is co-headlining the JFL Toronto thing. So, there are these opportunities, but they are overshadowed by, as you say, American celebrities in a lot of ways. And I like how in the Article 605 piece you like, as I say, it's like a little bit more radical than that initial letter. There's a line where you just say, "Empire's a bitch, eh?"
It's so true.
Yeah,
it's so true. It's like our single biggest problem is America. Like if
in a way, yeah.
I mean,
you
if
talk about oil, you make the comparison to the fossil fuel industry, which I think was like brilliant.
Yeah. Oh, thank you.
Like. There's a line where you say like, comedians will outlive the fuel-based economy. Let's protect them. What's the line that I really liked where you say, they're more slick than oil and less destructive for the environment,
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, you're talking about toxicity in the cultural sense, but you're also like talking about like literal forms of toxicity. I guess I wanted to end by asking, about your politics to some extent. The fact that, you clearly you host this soft left podcast. I don't think it's like currently rolling, but there's like 10 great episodes that people can check out on YouTube where you talk with Monty Scott and Carol Zockley, all these people who aren't just funny, but also like really passionate politically. It feels like your vision of political and cultural transformation in some ways, like this idea of local empowerment, and even like your understanding of like political division and all that stuff kind of comes from maybe your education, I don't know, but you're just like faith in some ways in left political movements. Is that fair to say? Like, to what extent do you kind of identify, I guess, as like a socialist as well as a comedian?
I always liked communism the most in theory, but right. Because it's all about the people, for the people, which is what comedy is. So it's like, I think it's influenced my politics and the way that I look at the world, like fundamentally, for sure.
And it's in CASC's DNA then, probably.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely. Yep.
Well, thanks so much.
Oh, my pleasure. Thank you for having me.
I'll have to let you go, but it's been really great talking to you.
It's been great talking to you too.
Take care.
Ciao.